With so much information out there, KREM 2 News is dedicated to helping you verify what's true.
The first question is this postcard legitimate?
Our Verify team provides trustworthy, transparent information on issues that affect the inland Northwest.
Is there a fault line that kind of runs north to south through Spokane? How likely is it that the Greater Idaho movement actually happens?
Join KREM 2 News right now as we take a look back at some of the most engaging Verify stories from the past year. Hello and welcome to this KREM 2 News Verify Special. I'm Mark Hanrahan. Over the next half an hour, we'll be counting down the top Verify stories from the past year. The list is based on the stories that you read and watched on KREM.com. So let's get started. The story coming in at number 10 had a lot of people dreaming big. When the Mega Millions jackpot reached $1 billion this past summer, we heard from a lot of viewers who wanted to know about their odds. Here's what we were able to verify. The mega-sized jackpot has generated a lot of ticket sales. Now some viewers want to know, do the odds of winning Mega Millions change depending on how many tickets are sold or how long it's been since a winner? Let's verify. Our sources are Mega Millions and Joshua Johnston, the director of Washington's lottery. According to Mega Millions, the odds of winning the jackpot are about 1 in 302.6 million. Since the numbers never change, those odds remain the same, regardless of how many tickets are sold or the size of the jackpot.
No, the odds do not change depending on the amount of tickets sold. It doesn't matter if it's $20 million or $1 billion, the odds are the same.
But what if no one has won in a long time? Do the odds of someone winning a jackpot improve?
Well, the odds of the jackpot getting hit do increase because we are seeing a lot more people play. So the more people that play, the more combinations that are being used, and therefore the likelihood of it getting hit does go up.
So more tickets sold means it's more likely there will be a winner, but what can you do to improve your odds?
If somebody is looking for a way to improve their chances of winning, that is by, purchasing more tickets.
One of the biggest stories on the West Coast this year was the breakup of the Pac-12. After more than 100 years together, Washington State University and the University of Washington will no longer be in the same conference. But did you know there was an effort in Olympia to keep the schools together? So take a look at our story coming in at number 9. The decision by the University of Washington to leave the Pac-12 will have impacts that go well beyond the one university. After more than 100 years of sharing the same conference, UW and Washington State now find themselves unaligned and facing big questions about the future of their rivalry.
What's it worth? I understand business. I understand change. Everyone's got to change, and we got to adapt. And Wazoo will find its way. We have for 100 and some years.
Several viewers, including John, reached out to ask, was there any attempt by the state to keep UW and WSU together? Let's verify. Our sources are Washington State Senate Bill 5206 and Senator Drew McEwen, the main sponsor of the bill.
Both schools receive significant taxpayer funding. I believe that the taxpayers have a right to have oversight to a certain degree via the legislature on major decisions, and certainly changing conferences is a major decision for either school.
Senate Bill 5206 was introduced in January. It leaned into the shared history of WSU and UW and reads in part, it is in the public's interest to preserve the shared state history and athletic achievement of the University of Washington and Washington State University by maintaining these schools in the same athletic conference.
So the objective of the bill was to, one, have WSU and UW stay together, that if they move conferences, that they go together. And secondly, that they would have to have legislative approval.
The senator acknowledges it would have been difficult to get the bill passed. However, it never even got a hearing after he says both schools pressured the committee chair.
I was told at the time, and their statements that they made to me were that we don't need this. It'll be a distraction. The Pac-12 is going to be fine. There's not going to be any more schools leaving. Frankly, I don't blame the University of Washington for exploring its options. But WSU passed up an opportunity to potentially have a solution for themselves through this bill.
So we can verify, yes, there was a bill to try to keep UW and WSU in the same conference, but it never made it out of committee. Colleges weren't the only ones looking to realign this year. Several Oregon counties expressed interest in leaving the state to create what they called Greater Idaho. But could it actually happen? We verify at number 8. The Greater Idaho Movement proposes 15 counties leaving the state of Oregon and joining Idaho. It's an idea that has generated a lot of talk, but is it realistic? Several viewers reached out to ask, is there an actual way that Oregon counties could become part of Idaho? Let's verify. Our sources are the U.S. Constitution and constitutional law professor Richard Seaman from the University of Idaho. Article 4, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution addresses the creation of new states and the steps needed to make it happen. The Constitution states, new states may be admitted by Congress into this union, but no new state shall be formed or erected without the consent of the legislatures of the states concerned, as well as of the Congress.
The Oregon legislature, the Idaho legislature, and U.S. Congress would have to sign off on this before it would happen.
That's right. Essentially, what would happen is the Oregon and Idaho would have to enter into what's called an interstate compact, which would require both legislatures to approve it. Then it would be presented to Congress, and the U.S. Congress would have to approve it as well.
In both houses of Congress, the House and the Senate.
Both houses of Congress, and then it would go to the president.
When was the last time that state lines were redrawn in our country?
I think you'd probably have to go back to the creation of West Virginia to find something analogous. You might know that the folks in West Virginia did not want to secede from the Union like the folks in Virginia did, and that was what precipitated that split up.
So we can verify, yes, there is a way that Oregon counties could become part of Idaho, but
how likely is it that the Greater Idaho Movement actually happens?
I think it faces a really steep uphill battle. You just ultimately have to get a ton of folks to agree for it to happen. And that's always going to be difficult because Greater Idaho would mean lesser Oregon. You might think of it that way, or many Oregonians, I suspect, would see it that way.
Is it true that there's a fault line that goes down Division Street?
Still ahead, we are verifying the truth about earthquakes in Spokane. Plus, is that actually the CDC calling you? What you need to know about unsolicited calls as the countdown of our top Verify stories of the year continues. Welcome back to our KREM 2 News Verify special. We are counting down our top stories from the past year, and we are up to number 7. If you have lived in the Pacific Northwest for any length of time, you have no doubt heard the warnings about the risk of earthquakes. But what about Eastern Washington? Are there fault lines in our region you should be concerned about?
So my question is that, is it true that there's a fault line that goes down Division Street?
To verify this question, we turn to Chad Pritchard, professor of geosciences at Eastern Washington University, and Harold Tobin, a professor of earth sciences at the University of Washington and director of the Pacific Northwest Seismic Network.
Is there a fault line that kind of runs north to south through Spokane, kind of paralleling Division Street?
I know that there are some evidence of faults that have been mapped, underneath and running through Spokane in that general north to south kind of configuration.
Well, Tobin says the risk of earthquakes, specifically strong, damaging quakes, isn't nearly as great in eastern Washington compared to western Washington. There have been small quakes recorded in Spokane. This map from the Journal of Geophysical Research shows where those small quakes have been detected. The white circles indicate where they happened, and these are all between a magnitude 1.6 and 2.2.
I heard this awful boom, and my bed started to shake.
Felt a big rumble and a pop and just wondered what it was.
You may recall in 2001 when a stronger, nearly 4.0 magnitude quake hit beneath downtown Spokane, causing bricks to fall from chimneys and left visible cracks in walls.
There are definitely north-south faults in our area, but not that I know of that are extremely active.
Chad Pritchard says the more significant fault line in the Spokane area is the Latah Fault that runs along the west side of Spokane, including along Latah Creek. But other fault lines in the region are even more significant.
The biggest earthquakes are going to be coming from Sandpoint area. We have the Lewis and Clark fault zone, and then down south in the Tri-Cities area. And then, of course, off the west coast at Cascadia.
But just because fault lines have been detected in and around Spokane at this point, Pritchard and Tobin don't see a reason for people in eastern Washington to be overly concerned.
Despite the fact that we have some evidence that faults exist in Spokane and that there have been some small earthquakes in Spokane, we don't really see any evidence of something that would be concerning about the potential for a very large earthquake. They can happen and take us by surprise, but really we don't see that hazard in the same way as other parts of the state.
So we can verify, yes, several fault lines have been detected in and around Spokane, including ones that run north to south, but none that our two experts say show a potential for producing a large, damaging quake. At number 6, this past summer brought some new water restrictions to the city of Spokane, and our viewers definitely had plenty of questions about them. Our Verified team explained the drought response measure and how it relates to flows on the Spokane River. We also broke down the water restrictions, verifying the limit on when people could water and for how many days each week. And at number 5, we verified why people in Washington state still need to set their clocks back this fall. Despite a state law that would make daylight saving time permanent in Washington, the effort still lacks the required federal approval. Still ahead, a new program brings changes to paychecks in Washington state.
It works just like a Medicare or Social Security. You pay in a little bit of every paycheck over your career.
Our Verified team breaks down the cost of the Washington Cares Fund. Plus, can your boss combine your vacation and sick time? We Verify coming up next. Welcome back. I'm Mark Hanrahan. Right now, we are counting down the top stories from our local Verified team from the past year. We are now up to number 4, and it's a topic that had a lot of you taking a closer look at your paychecks. Here's what we verified about the Washington Cares Fund.
First long-term care bill in the United States.
Years after it was passed, the Washington Cares Fund is officially launching. The program aims to make long-term care available to people across Washington state, but how much will it cost you? Noah writes, "My boss said my pay will be lower next month because of a new tax. Is this true?" Let's verify. Our sources are Ben Vecti, director of the Washington Cares Fund, and House Bill 1087. Back in 2019, lawmakers passed legislation that created the Washington Cares Fund, a state-run long-term care insurance program. Washington taxpayers who have contributed to the fund for 10 years can receive a $36,500 lifetime benefit to help pay for long-term care needs. The program is funded by a payroll tax, which goes into effect on July 1st.
It works just like a Medicare or Social Security. You pay in a little bit of every paycheck over your career.
Most workers in Washington will pay a tax of 0.58% of their wages.
So the typical worker is going to pay about $12 a paycheck or $24 a month into WashCares. That's somebody who makes about $50,000 a year. If you make more than that, you'd pay in more. If you make less, you'd pay in less, because it's a percentage of your wages.
So we can verify, yes, most Washington workers will see a deduction in their paycheck starting in July because of a new payroll tax. However, some workers may be eligible for an exemption.
The new types of exemptions are for types of workers who might have had to pay in, but maybe wouldn't have been able to plausibly have a path to being eligible to claim benefits.
At number 3, we verified how sick time and paid time off programs work in Washington state. For a long time, sick days and vacation days were tracked separately, but many companies are now using paid time off, or PTO. This program combines vacation time, sick time, and some other forms of leave into one pool. PTO is legal in Washington, although employers do have to follow a few rules when it comes to compensation and carryovers. We have covered a lot of ground, and we are now up to our number 2 Verify story from this past year. When it comes to unsolicited phone calls, it can be difficult to tell what's real and what's not. So when one viewer received a call claiming to come from the CDC, she reached out to the KREM 2 Verify team. Our question comes from a viewer named Linda, who reached out to say she received 2 calls from a number that claims to be the CDC. Linda shared the phone numbers and asked if we could verify if the call was legitimate. Our sources are the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Disease, the National Opinion and Research Center at the University of Chicago, and the Federal Trade Commission. Linda shared the calls came from the phone number 404-806-4812. On its website, the CDC has a webpage specifically for people who got a phone call from the same number as Linda, as well as 3 others. The CDC explains the phone calls are part of a national immunization survey. It seeks information about childhood vaccinations and related health issues. A letter from the National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases says phone numbers for the survey are chosen at random by a computer. The numbers are then contacted by people at the National Opinion and Research Center at the University of Chicago who carry out the survey. The letter states, you do not have to take part, or you can decide not to answer one or more questions. If you get the call and want more details, you can call the survey takers back at 877-220-4805. So we can verify, yes, the CDC is calling people as part of a national immunization survey. However, it is always a good idea to be wary of unsolicited calls. The Federal Trade Commission warns, if someone calls you out of the blue and asks you to hand over personal information or wire money or pay with a gift card, it's a scam. If you ever have questions about a call, the FTC advises you to simply hang up. You can also report the call at donotcall.gov. From unsolicited phone calls to questions about an offer in the mail, several viewers reached out after getting this postcard. It claimed they might be eligible for thousands of dollars as part of a settlement. Our Verify team reached out to the legal team who sent the postcards and confirmed the settlement was legitimate as part of a breach at the Washington Department of Licensing. More viewers reached out for details about the settlement than any other Verify story this past year. However, the deadline to file a claim and to get a payment has already passed. So that brings us to our #1 Verify story in this countdown, and it's a topic that affects all of us: gas prices. Our top Verify story of the year is next. Welcome back. We have now made it to the #1 spot on our countdown of the top Verify stories of the past year. We put this list together based on the stories that you read and watched on KREM.com. Our top story is one our Verify team has been following for more than a year: the impact of Washington's Cap and Invest program on prices at the gas pump. It's been 11 months since the Climate Commitment Act took effect in Washington. The new law aims to do things like reduce greenhouse gas emissions and our dependence on fossil fuels. One of the ways the state is doing that is by making the state's largest pollution emitters buy carbon offset credits at quarterly auctions. The program is quickly generating a lot of revenue.
And we've raised a lot of money. We think so far we've raised about $1.3 billion. So that's a lot of money.
That's Luke Martland with the Department of Ecology and the implementation manager for the Climate Commitment Act. He says the legislature will ultimately decide exactly how that money is spent, but it will be invested in things like clean energy and dealing with the impact of climate change. But the new law has also led to higher prices at the pump. How much higher? Depends on who you ask.
Does ecology know or have a way to track how much it attributes an increase in gas prices to the law specifically?
It's hard to make that connection month by month or week by week, but we have estimated that we think the impact could be around 25 cents a gallon, maybe 27 cents a gallon, and these are only estimates.
25 to 27 cents a gallon more for gas, much different from what the state told us last winter.
I really don't think it's going to be noticeable.
That prediction was at odds with an article published by Todd Myers with the Washington Policy Center. Before the law took effect, he predicted it would drive up prices nearly 50 cents a gallon.
Right. Looking back at that prediction now, how are you feeling about it today?
Well, a year ago, we predicted, and based on the Department of Ecology's own projections, that it would add about 46 cents a gallon. The prices, interestingly, turned out to be just about correct. We're currently about 40 cents a gallon higher than Oregon. At the end of last year, Oregon and Washington had virtually identical prices. We're now about between 35 and 40 cents a gallon higher than they are, so they've turned out to be correct.
Since Myers and Ecology disagree on how much the CCA has driven up prices, we turn to another source for more analysis.
Have you seen a direct correlation between the Cap and Invest program taking effect and an increase in gas prices in Washington?
It looks like there was a direct impact.
Patrick DeHaan is the head of petroleum analysis for GasBuddy, which tracks prices at about 150,000 gas stations in the U.S. and Canada. He says Washington now has the third highest prices in the country, behind only Hawaii and California.
In fact, just in Washington state, did we see an abrupt sudden jolt higher in gasoline prices that's likely attributed to the cap and trade program being implemented back prior to the new year. Oregon and Washington prices were virtually neck and neck. Now, Washington prices are about $4.45, whereas Oregon is about $4.15. So certainly a much bigger gap that has been relatively consistent since the start of the year.
While Ecology admits the new law has resulted in higher prices at the pump, they don't believe it's the primary factor at play. They argue things like supply and refinery issues also have an impact.
We do think cap and invest has an impact on those prices, but it's just one of the factors that drives those increases. And now, more recently, the price is going down.
While the prices have been dropping as we head into winter, DeHaan says Washington drivers should expect to keep paying among the highest prices in the nation.
Washington will probably be very primed to continue being the third most expensive state in the nation.
Thank you for joining us for this KREM 2 News Verify special as we take a look back at the top Verify stories of the past year. If you have a question you would like verified, just let me know. Just email verify@krem.com. I'm Mark Hanrahan. Keep it here on KREM 2 News for more Verify stories. And thank you for watching.